Oh, Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be here, Andy. Thanks for the invite. Pumped,
Ye-
pumped to talk to you.
Yeah, this is exciting. You and I have got to know each other pretty well over the last, I don't know, few months or so since you moved to Florida. We've got to hang out a few times. I met you through some other guys in your EFM crew, Jamie and Mike, and of course our mutual friend Vincent Pugliese, who runs the Total Life
Yes.
Freedom Group. And I know that you have been doing some great things running multiple businesses, and you've been getting into doing more coaching and consulting, and you have an amazing story from what I understand that I'd love to hear and share with our listeners. So it's good to have you on.
Yeah, glad to be here, man. Yeah, I feel like about a month ago we were hanging with all of our kids and wives in the pool in a resort and just having a blast together. So
I
fun
know
to
we've done a couple of those, and like you said, I think you made the comment about masterminding by the pool,
That's right.
which we've done probably 3 times now. Every time we hang out, we're in a pool, which such is life in Florida, right?
That's right.
And on that topic, though, one of the things we've even talked about is the types of friends we have, the types of conversations we have, and how it's so valuable to have friends where when you get together, not taking anything away from sports or weather, but you're not just talking about sports or the weather. Like, you have real conversations. You can talk about business. You can talk about other people that you associate with, the things you've been learning lately, how you've been raising your kids, and things you've been doing right and wrong, and learn from others and not worry too much about judgment. And I appreciate that we have that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, man. It's good to have friends that are wanting to elevate in all areas of life, and that's a big part of who I am, is making sure that not just the business, but my marriage, my kids, my fatherhood is all going well. So it's good to have guys that you can link arms with and share the struggles, share the challenges and opportunities of some wins ahead too.
Yeah, and I know you do a lot of that. You have your podcast, The Entrepreneurial Family Man, with some other co-hosts, and you do some coaching and consulting. You're involved in many groups, and I know you've been helping people a lot with getting over fear. And I definitely want to get into that. But before we do, let's start with your story. Where did you come from, and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah. Well, do you want me to talk about the fear story, or just a little bit of background
Well, you start with a
first?
little bit of background, but I would love to
Yeah.
get into the story of how you got over your first major fear of public speaking.
Sure. Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, we'll put that story on pause for a minute and just say that, yeah, I grew up in Northern California, met and married a beautiful, beautiful bride of mine at 18 years here in a couple of weeks, down in San Diego. And we I had a great career start in politics, of all things. After 6 years, I finally realized this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life, and had to scratch that entrepreneurial itch. And so literally had that kitchen table experience with my wife where we put some things down on a napkin that said, well, what are we interested in? What are we good at? Where we've been gifted? What connections do we have? And this idea of starting an online travel business came into the forefront, based on some of our interests and hobbies and things of that nature. So 2006, left the career of politics, started an online business, and the rest is history in terms of entrepreneurship. I've got a couple online companies now, have raised up a team to run those, and so I'm very much removed from the day to day, because I just have an amazing team that's handling the intricacies of running those businesses. And the last couple of years, been able to push back and do some coaching, some consulting now in the business world. And these two topics in particular is one, working on fear. As much as I coach people and in masterminds, a lot of the basis of why people are not taking the next step has to do with what I call FUD. And that's the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that creep in. And so taking a look at how to address that, how to tackle that directly. And then another thing that I'm just passionate about, and people say my nicknames or middle names are productivity and efficiency, is just this idea of truly working on your business and not in it. And so helping especially entrepreneurs and solopreneurs gain more time freedom from their business, and some of the financial freedom, and spending more time with their loved ones by automating, eliminating, delegating, outsourcing some of the stuff that they don't want to. So
Yeah.
that's a bit about me.
That's awesome, and such big topics there. And you've built this wonderful business in a way that you're not dependent on one location or place. You've moved around a couple times. You lived in California and Oregon and Florida, and oftentimes I think kind of living the life that a lot of people might dream of. And you talk about that because you want to inspire other people, I know, to be able to do that as well. And that's one of the reasons for working on the business instead of in the business. But getting back to the fear thing, I like to talk about fear a lot as well, because I know where it's held me back, and I see where it holds so many people back from doing the things that they really want to do, from following their dreams, from taking that chance, from starting a business, having that important conversation, maybe having more of a social media presence, speaking more, whatever it is. I think a lot of people have ideas in their heads and think, I'll never do that, or I can't ever do that, because they have fear that holds them back.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. And, that gets us to that big story of mine, kind of as I've been going back through my life story and looking at some themes. One of the big instances that I had to get over was this fear of public speaking. And, we were joking earlier on the call, but that's one of Jerry Seinfeld's famous quotes about the top fears is number one, public speaking. Number two is death. And he goes, wait a second. So you would rather be in the casket than give the eulogy, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that a lot of people thinking like, yeah, I think I would.
Right. Yeah. So for me, it was, I remember it vividly because it was the last week of high school, June of 1998. And I had just left the principal's office. Now, this wasn't not as bad as it sounds. I had just given my final draft of my valedictorian speech. And you got to press pause here for a minute and go back to about a month earlier when I had learned that indeed I was given that opportunity to speak. And I was terrified. I was like, no, I don't want to speak in front of a couple thousand people. Like, oh my gosh.
Just give me my diploma, as many people would be thinking.
I just want to walk down at the very end, right? And so I had to face that fear. And God bless them, I got wonderful parents who would just help me realize, this is an opportunity you've worked hard for. You've been given this gift of this platform to speak and to share from your heart. And, so what's the worst that could happen? And we actually went through kind of that list of like, what's the worst that could happen? Like maybe I'd have to run off the stage or whatever, but at least I get to like give this speech and it's going to be printed. Right. And so go back to that June day, I had, I'd given that draft, and in the context of who I was as a high school student too, this is where you're going to roll your eyes, because I was that guy, right? I was like, yes, I was a valedictorian. I was also a student body president and like multi-sport, athlete, and all that involvement, really because I was working towards scholarships, frankly. And I was also very active and vocal about who I was and my beliefs. And so I was president of the Christian club on campus. And so we had some outreaches there where people knew where I stood, and even in classes. And so it was a shock when later that afternoon, I get a call that says, hey, the principal wants to speak to you. So I go back into his office, and he sits down and says, Chris, I've looked through your draft, and you can't give this speech. And I'm like, what? And he says, there's references to God and to your faith, and this is not appropriate. You can't give this speech. You need to rewrite it. And I was a little baffled. I mean, again, kind of a young 18-year-old, and just going, I thought I had the right to, and there's something about, free speech. And I said, let me go back to my parents, and then we'll talk about it tonight, and I'll get back to you in the morning. And so I did. And through the counsel of my parents, a pastor, an attorney friend of ours, that next morning, we decided to seek an injunction against the school district, which would essentially bar them from censoring my speech. And man, those next 72 hours were surreal. Well, my classmates
always goes over well when you're doing
yeah, you only take you to court, right? But my classmates were doing senior skip day and kind of having fun, scooting into graduation. I was holding press conferences at the school grounds, and the media in Northern California picked up on what was happening. So they were very curious. So then Friday of graduation, we were actually at the graduation ceremony grounds for the dress rehearsal. And we get the call from the court, and they said, we've denied your injunction. And so that meant going back into the principal's office, third time in a week. You know, you're like, here I may have a straight A student in the principal's office a lot. And we sit down, and this is hours before graduation, and he goes, all right, we're going to go through this line by line. He had his like dreaded red highlighter out.
Yeah.
And he says, okay, we're going to take this word out and this sentence, whatever. And I quickly realized this is not my speech. This is not who I am. It's not sharing from my heart. Mm. And so at that time, we agreed to that I would give up and give just a quick paragraph explanation of why I couldn't speak that night. And so getting to graduation, there were a lot more cameras there than as normal graduations would have it. We get it through the ceremony into where I was going to be scheduled to come up and take the podium. And I just remember this moment vividly because I started taking the steps up, and I see the principal walk up in front of the podium, and he grabs the microphone from the podium and he says, Chris, get off the stage. You lost your right to speak today when you went to court.
Wow.
And here I am like, what is going on? And man, in that moment, I was just deeply humiliated in front of thousands of people. Like,
did he say that on the mic, or was that just to you privately?
He pulled the mic away and said that to me privately. And
I imagine people are watching, and I imagine your speech was much more anticipated by the student body than a normal valedictorian speech that most people would, let's be honest, ignore and be waiting for for it to be done so we can get out of here.
Right. Just give me my diploma. So,
yeah.
So he begins talking to me, berating me. Meanwhile, to your point, the crowd starts going crazy, and they start chanting and pounding the stadium seats. Let him speak.
Oh my
Let
gosh.
him speak. And it just got like crazy loud, like a major football game, right? And the school board members, which were on stage, they came and surrounded me, started just saying, Chris, you're making a fool of yourself. Get off the stage. Whoa. We're going to have, and then they finally said, we're going to have you arrested if you do not get off the stage. And I am, 18 years old. I'm crying. I've got a mix of emotions of anger, of just so much there. And I quickly realized, like, okay, this is not going to end the way I want it to. And I went down the middle of the stage just sobbing, like heaving shoulders of emotion and rejection and humiliation. And fortunately, like my classmates all got up and surrounded me, like this kind of big group hug, and we went back to our seats, and that was the end of it in terms of graduation. It continued on, but the cool thing in the story, Andy, is that I had, again, back to this fear thing, I had addressed, like, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
Well, that was kind of the worst that could happen.
Actually, it's a lot worse than you thought.
Right? And so I teach this whole FUD factor and the whole 4 steps to overcoming your fear. And there's the other ways is to address this is what could happen. And then how can I mitigate that? What could I do that's in my control? How could I fix that? And then quantify, like, what's the best case and worst case scenarios if I didn't even get up on stage? Well, the cool thing is that that's not the end of the story, because the next morning, this is back in like the answer machine days, right? So my parents' answer machine is like blowing up after I woke up late from, senior party night. And there were media outlets from across the country, nationally syndicated radio, Fox TV, CNN, people all across the West Coast that were like, we want to hear what happened and we want to hear from you. And so for the next month of that summer, I was on dozens and dozens of TV, radio interviews. The actual speech got printed in major papers like the Chronicle, San Francisco Chronicle, and Sacramento Bee. Wow. I was able to give the speech on live radio that literally reached millions of people. And the impact of the speech was simply this. It was 3 points. Who are we? Why are we here? And where are we going?
Yeah.
And yet it was general enough to reach anyone that was listening and really made them think. And so we just got amazing letters and emails from people saying, oh my gosh, I heard you on whatever and ended up changing my life because of this. And so it's just kind of cool you just never know like what fear could be holding you back and what's on the other side of that fear.
And it's so amazing because so many people in life might try to hold you back for seemingly silly reasons. I mean, I haven't heard the speech or seen the speech. I know you, and I got to imagine it was something that would be applicable to anybody. And I know you probably had some references to your faith and God, but I imagine that wasn't the overarching theme of the speech. And yet they wanted to take that out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I mean, there's so many times it's people that hold us back. And an interesting side note, I've had 2 principals in my life. My elementary principal was Mr. Hurt, and this principal was named Mr. Pain.
Wow.
So sometimes those painful people that want to hurt you do put up a roadblock in front of you, and they're the obstacle you've got to overcome. And you know as well as I do, because you talk about this, starving your fears, is sometimes you just have to starve those people in your life that are negative and move on.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this idea of fear. And the biggest fear, I think, people say the number one fear is public speaking. I think the biggest fear in general is judgment from others, right? You fear that humiliation. And you had an experience that was ostensibly very humiliating, right? You're in tears walking off this stage in front of hundreds of people. I don't know how big your graduating class was, but instead of it, ruining you, these people came together to your aid. You had news outlets that wanted to hear from you. The worst thing that could possibly happen, it was probably worse than you anticipated, ended up in the long run not being that bad, right? And I feel like that's usually the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in that example, I would have reached maybe a couple thousand people that were there, right? Friends and family, Uncle Bob on the stands. Mm-hmm. But I think there was a higher purpose in mind. And so, yeah, I was able to reach many more people than I could have even realized. And I think that's true of a lot of the scenarios where we might have a goal or an objective that is big, and it might be a big stretch for us, and it might affect and impact a lot of people. And so sometimes we stay small because we're like, boy, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I want to put myself out there, or that fear of rejection, like you said, the fear of being humiliated or losing control of the situation. But I think so many times we just have to step into that and find confidence through the process.
Yeah. Okay. So how do we do that? Because this is a very common fear. I have spent my entire life being afraid of rejection. I still deal with it. I think, I talk about starving your fears on this podcast and other places, which is usually, I created it as a reminder to me that if I'm scared of something, I need to lean into it and do it. If there's a chance I want to take, I need to go take that chance. But it doesn't change the fact that I'm still afraid of certain things, not as much of failure anymore, but of course of judgment, and especially of rejection. If we're thinking about doing something new, we have an opportunity to speak somewhere, but we're afraid or terrified of, what people might think. How do we get past that?
Yeah, good question. And this is as old as history, right? Of people just having those self-doubts or those limiting beliefs or whatever. So I've created a process that I go through, and it's really something that I've seen happen in my life throughout the years that I've just developed. And it's this idea called the FUD factor and the 7 C's to confidence. So FUD, again, stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And there are not a lot of people like you and me that want to talk about fear. In fact, I think we've actually sugarcoated it over the past decade. We talk about now their limiting beliefs or upper limit challenges or whatever. Dude, let's just call it out. It's fear, right?
Yep.
And so I think part of this process is just hitting it head on. And so this idea of the FUD factor exercise that I go through is, and this is in the context of a goal, of a big, objective that you want to accomplish. A lot of times, you and I are involved in communities where 12-week year or best year ever, or whatever the goal course is.
Yep.
It's easy to throw a goal out there, but I think one of the things that gets lost in the process is identifying what's the fear or the doubt behind this goal. Why haven't I achieved this goal yet? And so I talk about that in terms of a SMART framework or even a SMART T framework. So I add the why. It's kind of a pun intended here. Just add the why. It's like, what is your why? Like, what's truly your why with this goal? So wrap it up in that SMART framework, and then dig deep on what's the motivation behind this goal. What is that you want to achieve? And then the FUD factor is 4 steps. So number 1 is address the actual fear itself. So what's the fear or the uncertainty or the doubt that's holding you back from the objective? Just call it out, address it what it is, say, what's the worst case scenario that could happen? So in that case of, public speaking or whatever it could be, is what's the worst case scenario here? And then the second step is to manage it. If these possible worst case scenarios happened, how could I manage that? What would it look like if I were to go through the process of mitigating that thing that happened or the outcome that I didn't want to happen? Again, this is just going through the exercise in your mind and getting it on paper so that it's not this villain inside your head. It's just stuff on a paper. You're like, you know what? That's not as bad as I thought. So we've addressed it. We've managed it. Now we get to the F, which is fix it. How can I fix it? If this happens, what could I do within my power or the connections that I have to fix the outcome? And then the 4th step is to quantify it, both in what if even partial success happened or full success happened by reaching this goal. Quantify what the outcome could be. A lot of times that really motivates someone to push forward and go, man, I just need to do this, because if this is going to happen, this is going to be the result. Go for it. And then also, and sometimes even more powerfully, is quantify what the process or what the outcome would be if you didn't take any action at all.
Right. Yeah. If you
just
take any
stuck
action,
and stayed. Right.
Yeah.
And
Here's
so
where
just
we are
getting
today.
through that. Here's where you are. You haven't taken the action. Quantify that in terms of whether it's a weight goal, like you're going to get stuck with bad health 6 months from now, a year from now, 3 years from now. Financially, you don't hit those metrics because you didn't push this course out or this offering out. So that quantifying part is a powerful piece of this process, this formula that we go through.
Yeah, this is a great process, because I think that people often will set big goals, right? And then they get held back, they don't do it, and a lot of times people say, well, it's because you didn't really have a plan, right? A goal without a plan is really just a hope, and that doesn't get you anywhere, right? You need to have a plan. But even if you have a plan, if you haven't properly addressed the fear or the thing that might be holding you back, then you're probably still going to get scared and stop. You might, say, my goal is to build a bigger presence online and start posting videos. And my plan is I'm going to post 1 video a week on Instagram or Facebook, whatever it is. But if you still have a major fear of rejection and judgment, and you haven't really addressed that, then how are you going to get past that? So let's say that I do recognize that, okay, I am scared. What do I do with that? How do I manage it and fix that fear?
Yeah, absolutely. So what could you do in your power to mitigate that? Like what would be the thing for you? Let's just use your example here.
Yeah.
You're scared of videos or what people might think of that. Like,
yeah. Well, I'm gonna use the example of our good friend John. I'm gonna call him out, John Vandermeulen, who's been has this exact, I think, situation, and I think it's to start practicing, start small, right? Take little chances, maybe create some videos that you can send to a couple friends and show them, get their feedback before you have to go big and maybe show more people. For me, it's just take the first step. It's take action, right? And see that, oh, it's really not that bad. I mean, the video might be bad, but it's really not that bad. That the judgment is really not as bad as I thought. In fact, nobody even really paid attention to it. And then keep getting more practice and more practice and more experience. But if you have some people you trust, I think the best thing is, try some stuff in a safe environment, get some feedback, and keep looking at improving.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's funny that you mentioned that. I haven't shared this with you yet, but the part of the process of the 7 C's to confidence is that. I mean, number 1, it's call it out. What is the fear or the uncertainty, the doubt that's holding you back from this? So just call it out. Like I said, get it on paper. Do it in that whole smarter framework process. The second C is to make a commitment, to say, you know what, I'm going to do this. And to your point, I'm going to take these small steps. I'm going to make this small step of just sending out a 30-second video to try and send it to my friends, whatever. But it's making that commitment. And then the third step, to your point, is the connections. Who do you have? Who are you connected to that could help you with this big goal, this big objective you want to move forward on? You and I are connected to a lot of people. And if you simply reach out to 5 or 10 friends and say, hey, I've got this big, hairy, audacious goal I want to go after. Can you help me? People want to help each other. Like, we're just naturally inclined to be helpers.
Yeah.
And I think so many times we forget that because, again, we don't want to be rejected.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just say, you know what, like, these top friends or family, like, I need some help with this. I don't have the confidence yet to do this, but I named my fear. I've made this commitment. Now I need help from you, my connections. That's a big step. I think a lot of people don't get toward. And so, John, we're calling you out, man. Send us those videos.
Well, he has been recording some short videos and sending it to me. So that's why that example came to mind, because he's doing it. He's taking those steps, which I love to see.
Awesome.
And I've done some of this too. I mean, I started, a lot of people know me as someone that creates like tons of content and puts it out there and doesn't worry about it. But I started small, then closed groups, that I belong to, creating content first text only, and then, from pictures, and then getting into video, and then surrounding myself with other people who were doing those things, particularly on LinkedIn, where I'm very active. I surrounded myself with other content creators and saw what they're doing. And I'm like, dang, I got to do that too. Let me watch from them, learn from them. And it's working. It seems to be working for them. Let me give this a shot. What's the worst, to your point earlier, what's the worst that can happen? And really the worst that happens is generally nobody watches it. Nobody cares. Right. I mean, unless you're as big as Gary Vee, you're not going to be getting those hate comments, people coming after you. You're such an idiot. Like, it's just not going to happen unless you're big time. So, and you could use this example for anything. But you've got to start trying stuff to build that experience before you can ever build the confidence. And you were starting to talk about the 7 C's of confidence. You and I talked about this a little while back. I think we were at the pool. A lot of people want to have the confidence before they try something new, but it's never going to happen unless you try it and build the experience and then build the confidence, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. That's the premise to this 7 C's to confidence, and it's a course I'll be throwing out later this year, likely, but it's really taking those steps. So we can review it here if you like, but number one is that calling it out, call out the fear, make the commitment in the framework of a SMART goal and understanding why. Reach out to your connections, the 3rd C. Have them help, ask for the help. And then, number 4, you're starting to build courage, because there's this thing in life that it's called borrowed courage. When I reach out to you and say, hey, I want to do this, like, I think I need your help. And you have 5 or 10 people that reply back, you should do this, go for it. I'm here to support you. What do you need? You're borrowing their courage, even if at that point you don't really have it. And so you're making the steps toward, okay, you know what? Yeah, I can do this because other people believe in me, right? Which gets to that. The next C is capabilities. You're reminded, okay, this is the goal. These are the objectives. These are the next steps I need to take. You know what? I am capable of this. I can do this. I have the skill sets and the wherewithal to do it. In fact, these friends that I just reached out to, they said I have that. And so you've built the courage now. You've reminded yourself of the capabilities. The next is consistency. So to your point of being consistent on the posts, start with texts, start with video, whatever it is, do those sequential steps and be consistent with it.
It's day after day after day after day, or week after week, to build that experience, and that builds up more courage and capabilities. And of course, you do that through consistency.
Exactly. Yeah. And consistency is huge. And the 7th C, and this is why this is so important, and you practice what you preach in terms of being in masterminds, but the 7th C is community. Really doing it in community, having a band of brothers, a group of other entrepreneurs that you're with, where you're doing this task, this goal, whatever it is, in community. You're linking arms with other people. Again, you still don't have the confidence in all this yet, but you're doing it in community. And there's this, I think it's a Swedish proverb that says, I might butcher this here, but it says, you know, man, blanking on the wording of it, but you know, essentially, shared joys are twice as joyous, and shared challenges are half as heavy. And
Shared joy is double joy.
there you
Shared
go.
sorrow is half a sorrow.
Half a sorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Google.
Thank you, Google. That's right. But just to that point is, if you're in community, and we do this, right, in terms of sharing our wins, sharing our victories, and
Yeah.
it becomes that much more engaging. You kind of feed off of each other. The same is true when we share some of the challenges or maybe missteps. You have a community of people to be around and support you and to lift you up, and sometimes offer the advice that's needed or the tools or resources that you may need to get over that. But community is a big aspect of that.
Mm-hmm.
And the cool thing about this is it's just a self-revolving circle, because once you've gone through the process of these sequential steps and you've shared this in community, confidence is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Confidence is happening through the process.
Mm-hmm.
And that confidence to get you to this goal is going to lead you to the next goal. And so start all over. What's this next goal?
Yep.
What do I need to address?
Yeah.
What do I need to call out and commit to? So that's my 7 C's to confidence.
Yeah, a lot of people ask about, how do you get rid of fear? I want to be fearless or whatever. I've talked about this many times before. I mean, there's never going to be an absence of fear, especially if you keep trying new things. And courage is not the absence of fear. It's just looking at fear and saying like, okay, I think I have what it takes to go do this, whatever it is, I'm going to give it a shot. And that one thing I learned from a mentor of mine, Larry Yach, is that fear is the absence, or fear is the perceived lack of control. You just don't know what's going to happen, right?
Mm.
But if you build up enough experience, you keep trying things, you call it out, you make that commitment, you leverage your connections, you build your courage, that starts to build your capabilities, and you build your experience. And then your courage goes up, your fear goes down as you keep trying to do those things. And the first time I did a podcast interview, I was scared as hell. Now I've done over 200. You and I get on the same, I know you've done a bunch as well. You and I get on Zoom, we just start talking, we record it and we post it, and we don't even think about it. But that's because we've done it so much that we're not scared to do it anymore.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I remember, I mean, we like me, like some of the first podcast episodes I had just like these clammy hands, and I'm sweating a little bit more than I used to. And
yeah,
now it's just like, it's a normal Tuesday. Let's do this.
Yeah, exactly. I remember the first one I did, actually the first one I did was my friend Jason Teeters. The second one was with Aaron Walker, who I know you know pretty well. And he had already been on probably hundreds of podcasts. And this is like my second interview. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to be judging me about how well this went, right? But it went fine. And it got me going. And, like I said, 200 plus whatever interviews, 2 years later, here I am. And going out and taking that chance is what allowed me to start building experience. And I love what you said about community as well, because I've been involved in communities, and I think there's a couple important aspects there. Number one, you surround yourself with people who are willing to not only support you and give you that borrowed confidence, like you said, but also to challenge you, to hold you accountable and say, hey, Chris, you told me that you were going to start a podcast, or you were going to start doing videos, or you were going to start going to the gym 5 days a week. Like, how's that going? Right? You don't want to let me down.
Nope.
And then the other aspect is that's worked really well for me is you get in a community where that's normal, right? If you want to get in better shape and you're in a community of a bunch of people that are working out every day and trying to get in better shape, it's normal to go to the gym 5 or 6 days a week. Whereas your other friends you hang out with, it's abnormal, right? And so they're like, whoa, I can't believe you're going to the gym that much. And you're an outlier, and then you maybe stop doing it. But if you get in a community that's, everyone's going to the gym, or you and I go to podcast conferences and hang out in podcast communities, everybody has a podcast. It's normal to be putting stuff out, content out there online all the time. And so it's you borrow that confidence from that. Well, they're all doing it, so I might as well do it as well. You surround yourself with people who are doing the things you want to do, so you can emulate them. And I think that builds a lot of confidence as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a key component of, and I think on any entrepreneur's journey, that's an area where I wish I would have focused on sooner in my entrepreneur journey. Is I was probably more isolated than I should have been those early years. And so it's great to see, like, your example of how you are just super engaged in multiple communities, within online or masterminds where you're doing live meetups. But, you have those you have those weekly challenges, or you have those weekly accountabilities where you're saying, okay, this is what I said I'm going to do. Did
Yep.
you do it? But
Yeah.
it gets to your point of, it's like-minded people that want to be growing individually and together.
Right. I know you run a mastermind. You're in masterminds. I'm in a couple of masterminds. I want to give a shout out to my friend Larry Hagner, who runs the Dad's Edge group, because it was because I heard his podcast and joined his community and joined a mastermind with him that I even started the podcast. Right. He challenged everybody to do a 90-day goal. I said, great, I'm going to start a podcast. This is back in January of 2017 or 16, I guess. And, got help from him, accountability. And then, started building my brand and finding my voice from being in a community of supportive people and people that are holding me accountable. And people are always willing to help if you're asking for help, right? So you mentioned the leverage connections and ask for help. Now, one other piece I want to get to is this idea of working on your business versus in your business. And I know part of this came from, you've built successful businesses of your own, but I know over the years, you've had a lot of people reaching out to you for help, and that you've helped a lot of people along the way because you like to help people. And I remember talking to you about this in March. At some point, you said, hey, maybe I should, build a business around this. Tell me about what are the couple of the key challenges or things that you see entrepreneurs doing wrong, that they're getting, really caught up working in the business versus on the business? What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, and quick shout out to the best business manager I have is my wife. So Alicia, this is a shout out to you, and thank you for identifying the fact that, like Andy, you just said, so many people would reach out to me, and I've spent, countless hundreds of hours at coffee shops or meals or on the phone talking to, mostly guys. They're like, hey, how did you do this part of your business? Or how did you do this? Or what'd you do here? And she finally said, you know what? You need to monetize that because you figured it out and people are asking you all the time, right? So just this whole idea of systems and processes and identifying, okay, this is the type of business I want. And I talk about this personally, and we talk about this over at Entrepreneurial Family Man a lot, is identifying the lifestyle you want and how could you build a business around that would serve the lifestyle you want first. I was that typical solopreneur, small business entrepreneur years ago who left a great, 6-figure paying job, jumped into my own business, quickly built that up to exceed what I was doing. But yet I was kind of handcuffed to the laptop and to the phone. And I was my own worst boss, right? And it was in those moments of going, you know what, I am doing too much. To your question, I'm doing too much over here, wearing the hat of sales, wearing the hat of marketing, having to deal with a little bit of HR because I started to hire a couple employees, doing the book still, keeping the foot on the gas of, website and graphics, all that stuff. And as you know, a lot of times entrepreneurs and solopreneurs, we wear all those hats. A lot of them don't fit. A lot of them are pretty scratchy, and we'd rather just chuck them.
Yeah.
And it's getting to that point of identifying, here's my true skill sets. I'm like, what's the awareness factor of, here's what I'm passionate about. This is why I built this business in the first place. A lot of times we're creatives, we're visionaries, and we want to do the thing to work in our sweet spot. But then we realize, my gosh, there's a lot to running a business. And so it's taken a step back. And I talk a lot about this in the way some of the coaching I do in consulting is really identifying where you're spending your time. And I mean, down to like every 5 or 10 minutes of your day, spend 2 weeks identifying what you're doing, all those tasks, and then have a date with yourself. Maybe it's a Saturday morning or whenever, but spend a couple of hours digging into that, identifying all those tasks that you would rather outsource. And so that's how I end up building, my businesses, was identifying, okay, I don't want to be doing this anymore or this. What can I do, and how can I produce a business system and a process? What tools are out there? What resources, and who can I find? And so that's a big component that a lot of, again, back to our other conversation, a lot of business owners get fearful because they go, gosh, I'm going to lose control if I do this, or what if this happens over here and it gets lost? Well, you're already doing all those things. You can take them back if you need to, but what would it look like if you were to outsource a few key areas that you don't like to do, and you gained 5 hours, 10 hours of your week back to spend with your loved ones, to work more in your sweet spot, to generate the sales you need? So those are some big areas that I think a lot of solopreneurs need to focus in on.
What do you say to those solopreneurs like me who say like, okay, I've identified my strengths. I know these areas where I probably should outsource, but my money's still pretty tight. I can't afford to, hire someone on. So I just have to do all these things myself because I can't afford to have anybody else do it.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I like to give this visual that your business is like a multi-story office building.
Hmm.
You've got this whole business, and if you were to go back and design your business building, what would that look like if every single floor in that building was a different department of your business? So you've got strategy and vision on a floor, you've got sales on one floor, marketing on one floor, HR, finances and bookkeeping. Maybe it's, in your case, content creation, right?
Yep. IT, technology stuff.
IT, there's all kinds of areas there.
Yep.
Where do you want to spend most of your day, on which floor? And where would you like to stay in a little office suite and focus on that sweet spot? What would you like to outsource out to the different floors? And where could you go periodically, take the elevator up, check in, say, hey, how's that project going? Okay,
Yep.
good, awesome. But part of this process is identifying that's the goal, and then realizing, okay, how much am I currently making right now?
Mm-hmm.
Right, divide that by 2,000 hours. That's kind of your rough hourly range, and you realize, man, I'm worth 50, 100, couple $100 an hour, and yet I'm posting a podcast that is, I could take 10 minutes, 15 minutes to do. But if I just spent some time to train someone how to do that, and I pay someone else, I mean,
$10
because
an
we've
hour,
used
whatever. Yeah. Or less.
people in the Philippines or wherever,
Right.
right? But
Yep.
they're happy for an awesome job. They're
Yeah.
getting a very much equitable wage where they are. And you've just saved a ton of areas. And I go through this whole process. There's 15 to 20 identifiable areas of expertise, from web development to content creation to bookkeepers, that are typically a lot less than what we're making.
Mm.
And so it's going through, what are those tasks you're doing? How can you then build a system and visually teach someone, train someone on a process, link up a couple of tools that you might need to do to augment that, and then let them try it. Again, what's the worst things that could happen? You get it back, you're already doing it. What if it goes well and you don't get it back? You
Yeah.
just saved all that time.
Right. Yeah. And I've been listening to you and doing this myself. First I edited my own podcast for a year. Then I finally hired a podcast editor. And then, I don't know, it's been more than 6 months now. I hired a virtual assistant, and
Yeah,
she's been
I
taking
remember
on more
talking
and
about
more of the
that.
work. And we're still kind of figuring that out. I'm outsourcing more and more and letting more things go. And I think the key to that was implied by what you're saying is that you outsource the things that you're not that good at or not worth your higher rate of time, and you get to spend more time on whatever it is. For me, it's sales and marketing that's going to bring in money that will easily pay for the other things. Now whether I actually bring those sales in is another story, but working on it, and I'm seeing that
That's right.
that's the area where I need to be spending most of my time, and outsource all the administrative detailed stuff, repurposing stuff, things like that. And for other people it might be different, but the
Right.
idea is to think about how and where you're spending your time, look at where you're spending all your time, how productive are you, and what is your time worth, and could you outsource some of those things to somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, I applaud you for this, because I remember talking again back to our pool mastermind theme
Yeah.
of meetups. But I think it was at the Orlando Marriott. You and I were talking about this probably 7, 8 months ago,
Yep.
and you took immediate action and hired that VA. And it was just awesome to see that you're moving into this space of freeing up yourself. Because again, the other thing that those tasks do is it bogs us down and gets us out of our creative zone of genius.
Yeah.
And so when you have less of that to do, you're more free to think about these strategic sales relationships or other partnerships, or in your case, hey, I've got time now to plan my first conference, right? I mean,
Hmm.
there are some really clear opportunities when you have a little more time to think creatively, and those are going to be much higher ROI for you.
Yeah. And I want to end on this, that I think will hopefully connect all this together, is that, I think one of the things people admire about me is that I take action on those things a lot. And one of the reasons is because I've adopted this mantra of starve your fears. And we talked about fear holding people back. What could you do if you didn't let fear hold you back? And if you don't let it hold you back and you don't worry about comparison, when you meet someone like Chris Niemeyer and you're like, wow, that guy's amazing at running businesses. He's very efficient. He uses, staff and he outsources things. I'm learning from him. And instead of saying, I could never do that, that's only for someone like him, I say, wow, let me learn from him and I'm going to go take action over here and I'm going to ask him for more help if I need it. And if I need more, I'm going to hire him, right? And join a community or hire a coach or whatever. And the more that I do that, the further along I get. And I see my friends that are doing that as well, being very successful. And the people who don't are letting fear hold them back. So think about that. Think about those, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the 7 C's of confidence. How can you leverage those? We'll put, some notes in the show notes on this, but Chris, if people want to find out more about this and connect with you, where can they go?
Yeah, well, personal website, chrisniemeyer.com. So that's spelled the correct way, CHRIS, Niemeyer, Niemeyer. I got links to my LinkedIn and Instagram there. You can find me on both of those handles at Chris Niemeyer as well. Happy to talk about this. I love talking about releasing people from their fears so they can go and do amazing things in terms of impact in the world. And then also, and I think even more importantly, in their home with their spouse, with their kids, really having a solid impact in those precious lives that we get to steward.
Love it. Chris, this has been awesome. So valuable, I know, for me, and I think it has been for our listeners as well. So thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Thanks again, man. Good to see you, Andy.
All right, take care.
See ya.